Now being recorded.
Well, I think we have a lot of people on now. We might go ahead and start. Can everyone hear me okay? Hopefully you can. You don't have to respond to that. So thanks for joining us on your holiday week. I'm sure you might have wanted to get out early or something, but so this is our first webinar about SEA General Supervision and LEA accountability. And this webinar series is intended to help special ed directors as they're starting or they're wanting a refresher on certain items. Today we're going to go over the components of the general supervision system, an overview of regulations related to selected general supervision topics, and have a brief Q&A on some of these topics. All of these webinars we're conducting along with CASE, which is the Center for Technical Assistance for Excellence in Special Education out of Utah State University. We work with them on a variety of things, and this is going to be very beneficial to us with their national perspective that they'll be providing. So here's the rest of our webinars. On December 5th, we'll have one over fiscal and budget procedures. In January, we'll talk about the SPP and APR, which we'll explain to you in this webinar. And then effective policies and procedures, dispute resolution, and leadership management. And if you can't hear me okay, just put in the chat box that you can't hear me. So the outcomes for today are basically to identify the 8 components that make up the system of general supervision and review the specific purpose of each of those components. And we also want you to get out of this is your accountability in terms of the general supervision requirements that we have. And at this point, I'll turn it over to Bill Johnson from CASE, who will be conducting the first half of the webinar.
Thank you so much, Todd, and welcome to everyone from around the state of Oklahoma to this first in the webinar series. As Todd mentioned, my name is Bill Johnson, and I'm a program specialist is my title with the Center for Technical Assistance for Excellence in Special Education, which is located out of Utah State University. And for those of you in the audience who are a first-year director, I was in your shoes quite a few years ago. I spent about 16 years as a director in the state of Montana in addition to my special ed teaching career before becoming a consultant in my what I thought was retirement. But anyway, I know sometimes it feels like you're drinking from a fire hose, but I guarantee you that it's going to get better. So for today and for each of the webinars, you will have what we call an electronic packet. And if you haven't downloaded that packet, then over in the corner, in the right corner where my arrow is now, you can see that there's a download available there for you. That would be what we call the e-packet that contains the information on this slide and the next slide. So you have an agenda, you have a copy of the PowerPoint presentation, you have a list of the Part B indicators, which will be referred to throughout the General Supervision series. You have a component graphic and some briefs on the components of general supervision and a chart that goes along with that. And then later on, Todd is going to share with you some materials that are included in the packet. He'll be discussing the Special Ed Director's data checklist, the general supervision monitoring and results-based accountability system that Oklahoma has been working towards, and also their data collection and reporting requirements. So that's what's contained in your e-packet, and there will be an e-packet for each of the webinars in this series. I would also mention that Todd is going to be making available to directors the accessibility to a large binder that we have put together that's available for download that goes through all components of general supervision and provides a lot of resources and things like that. So that's sort of the foundational resource material for the webinar series, and that will be made available to you by Todd at some point after today. So moving right along. Again, we mentioned TASE. We are the Center for Technical Assistance for Excellence in Special Education at Utah State University. It's part of the Center for Persons with Disabilities, and there's a little view of Old Main and Logan, Utah, and the mountains in the background. So let's talk about the big picture briefly. My part of this, and generally the opening session of each webinar, is going to take things from the federal perspective. And today we're going to be talking about why general supervision and the importance of accountability and effective systems, et cetera, as well as the 8 components. But this slide shows you the sections of IDEA Part B as it was reauthorized in 2004. Now, all of these things factor into what general supervision systems need to deal with. And I see Brenda has reminded you all that. If you do have questions, folks, at any time, please feel free to type a question in the chat box, and we'll also make a time available later on when you can unmute your phone and be able to ask a question. And for anyone who doesn't have their phone on mute, we're hearing a little bit of background noise from someone. So if you can double check that, and I believe you should be able to do *6 to mute your phone. Okay. So there's a lot of noise there right now. Okay, that's better. Okay, Brenda, would you mind pulling down the poll for me here? There we are. Okay, so we'd like for you to just take a moment. Please rate your understanding of SCA general supervision responsibilities and the process for LEA accountability in Oklahoma. We'll give you a moment to cast your vote there so we get a sense of where people's knowledge is as we enter into this webinar. Well, it looks like we've got some folks right around the middle there, and a couple folks on the higher end of understanding of general supervision, and but primarily on the beginning end of understanding general supervision. So that's about where we'd expect you to be as new directors. Okay, Brenda, we'll move on from that. We'll do that again, and we'll see where you are at the end. Thanks for doing that with us. This graphic, which identifies the components of general supervision as articulated by the Office of Special Ed Programs, OSEP, is one that is an apt description of what general supervision is, being interlinking puzzle pieces. So we're going to go through each one of these items today briefly, and then Todd is going to be talking about, where the state of Oklahoma is and the things that you have to do in terms of what would probably fall into the category of integrated on-site and off-site monitoring activities, perhaps some other things too, as he looks at LEA accountability, which is certainly one of the components of a state's general supervision system. So all states have a responsibility under IDEA to have a system of general supervision, and there's the regulation that lays that out. Now, what we find as we work in various states across the country is that Yes, everybody has a system of general supervision, and it has to look at the same things, but they all kind of do it a little bit differently. So the fact that the system is required, the OSEP does not, or IDEA does not tell states this is how you have to do it. They just identify what needs to be done. So all states have a system. And throughout the course of this series, you'll be learning more about Oklahoma's system of general supervision. So really what it's all about, general supervision is really all about accountability and ultimately being able to improve educational results for kids with disabilities, educational results and functional outcomes. So that's the primary focus of monitoring activities, but really when you get down to what's general supervision all about, that's really the focus of general supervision as well. All those things should come together to result in improved outcomes for kids with disabilities. OSEP suggests that effective systems of general supervision do support practices and improve educational results and functional outcomes. And they will use multiple methods for the identification and correction of noncompliance as soon as possible, but no later than 1 year after it's identified. And in terms of multiple methods there, we could be talking about whether, you have an on-site monitoring program in your state that comes and reviews files. There's dispute resolution. There are complaints that come in. There are various ways to identify noncompliance. And then finally, utilize mechanisms that encourage and support continuous improvement and enforce compliance. That's what OSEP says are the effective systems in a general supervision system. So now we'll get into a little bit about each of the puzzle pieces, and starting with the state performance plan and goals. Now, IDEA requires that each state have a state performance plan with measurable and rigorous targets for each of the 17 Part B indicators. And again, one of the items that you have in your electronic packet is a listing of the Part B indicators. And as you go through this webinar series, this webinar today and the webinars in the future, you will become a lot more familiar with Part B indicators if you aren't already. And the state has to report annually on their performance, and the state will also look at how you as LEAs do on those targets that they've set in their state performance plan. And this is simply a list of the indicators that you have in your materials. And like I said, you'll become more familiar with those over time. The second puzzle piece that we'll talk about briefly, fiscal management. States have to distribute funds in accordance with federal requirements. Funds have to be used in accordance with those requirements, and states provide oversight in the use of funds and align to the needs identified in the SPP and APR. So just as the federal government takes a look at Oklahoma and how Oklahoma is spending their IDEA funds, the state education agency also has to do that same component of general supervision as they look to see how LEAs are spending funds. How states and LEAs manage IDEA funds is considered in state determinations. So that determination that comes out from Todd's office on your district will include a component, an element of it that looks at how your state is spending money. That's where that term maintenance of effort comes from, if you're familiar with that. And these regulations are complex and require collaboration at both the state and at the local level. Integrated monitoring activities. This is another puzzle piece. Focuses on results while maintaining IDEA compliance. Integrates information from other components and differentiates supports based on need. Todd will be talking a little bit more about this specifically in reference to what you guys have going on as far as an accountability system within the state of Oklahoma for LEAs. But it would be a part of this aspect of general supervision under integrated monitoring activities. Again, multiple methods and data sources are used to monitor every program every year. So your LEA program, or if you have special education co-ops like we did in Montana, each of those entities is going to be monitored every single year. And the focus is going to be on improvement and compliance And the data generally suggests hypotheses for areas of improvement when you get into drilling down that data. Activities include continuous review of performance, written reports may come out as a result of some of those findings and the things that a district does to correct them, and internal and external technical assistance and professional development should be available to support correction efforts by LEAs. Another puzzle piece is effective policies and procedures, and there'll be a webinar devoted to that coming up in early 2019. State policies and procedures must be aligned with the IDEA. Those policies are going to identify, what are the methods that the state uses to detect noncompliance and to ensure correction, as well as maintain specifications for highly qualified personnel in those policies and procedures. The local policies at your district level need to be able to align with the policies of the state, and that those policies should have a focus to them. They're designed and implemented to improve results. And if you are in your districts working with any agencies, whether it be for preschool kids or otherwise, interagency agreements should be in place to secure the implementation of IDEA by relevant agencies. Another puzzle piece, is data on processes and results. This is where your child count data comes in, and of course I mentioned earlier dispute resolution and monitoring reports will include, is another example of data that's collected. All of these things are looked at and analyzed for areas of concern with respect to the targets that are established in the indicators in a given state's state performance plan. So in the reporting, data on processes and results, the annual performance report, is a really big one that the state does every year and sends into the federal government about how they're doing on their targets. And they're going to be taking a look at local education agencies and LEAs relative to those targets. That will factor into a status determination for your district, and data should be, improvement should be informed by the data that exists in your given district. That's the start for your analysis for improvement planning. Another puzzle piece, improvement corrections, incentives, and sanctions. This includes explicit state authority to enforce regulations, policies, and procedures, utilize technical assistance to ensure correction of noncompliance, and assist locals with improvement planning to meet state and local targets. Also includes methodology for improvement planning and verification of efforts. There can be formal strategies there, and it could be tied to the LEA's annual determination. There's the dispute resolution piece. All effective dispute resolution must be timely. All states will track the issues with dispute resolution, so when complaints come into the state that have to be investigated and followed up on, the state's going to have a record of all of those kinds of things and where they're coming from. And of course, if there's a number of them coming from one specific district, that might suggest some needs in that particular district and some areas that need some attention with regard to the implementation of IDEA. So it does inform on-site and off-site monitoring activities, and also evaluates the effectiveness of resolution efforts, and looks at whether or not parents and families understand their rights. These are the options for dispute resolution that you're probably familiar with, and maybe some of you have had an opportunity to be a part of some of these. I hope you haven't had an opportunity to be a part of a due process hearing request or any of those other things, but some of the things at the top, like IEP facilitation and mediation, can be very beneficial tools in those cases where you have a contentious relationship in developing services for a student. And we all know that happens at times. So another puzzle piece, targeted technical assistance and professional development. This is the part that's directly connected to the priorities established in the state performance plan. So a state has particular goals for various indicators. They want to move the needle on that goal. They're going to be looking at ways that they can help districts to improve in that area. With the improvement that would occur at the LEA level, that transfers to the state performance plan and the annual performance report for the state to improve its standing in the eyes of OSEP. So again, focused on improving results in compliance and differentiated based on local needs. Should be able to assist local education agencies with looking at the root cause of their problem through data drill downs. Should be suggestive of evidence-based practices and promising practices and high leverage practices that would be beneficial to addressing the needs that are identified in a given district, and they should always be evaluated for their effectiveness in a cyclical aspect. So again, those are the components of general supervision. We've touched briefly on those. Your electronic packet contains this graphic as well as a brief description of each one. And again, they are all connected together. So when you talk about targeted assisted and professional development, how that relates to the state performance plan and integrated on-site monitoring, as you become more familiar with general supervision, you will see how each of these things informs one another. So an integrated system, each of the components interacts with others to improve accountability. And again, the primary thing is that we're looking to improve results and functional outcomes for kids with disabilities and make sure that program requirements and compliance is maintained with the requirements of IDEA. This is another chart or a graphic that gives you a little bit different look at the interrelationship of general supervision components. And of course, in the center of this chart is all about program performance. So that's just another way for you to take a look at those elements that go into general supervision and the fact that they're all focused on improving program performance. I wanted to share a couple of slides briefly with you about results-driven accountability before we turn things over to Todd to talk about what's going on for LEA accountability in Oklahoma. It was back in 2012 that then Secretary of Education, Arne Duncan, made this statement in a press release that sort of ushered in the age of results-driven accountability. We have to expect the very best from our students and tell the truth about student performance so that we can give all students the supports and services that they need. The best way to do that is by focusing on results. Now, prior to that time, monitoring efforts had primarily focused on data on compliance, and the focus of monitoring was looking at how we dotted the I's and crossed the T's and things like that in the special education process in our paperwork. And up to the time of early this decade when Arne Duncan made that comment and results-driven accountability came onto the stage, what we saw in graphs of data on compliance over the years is it kept getting better and better, and it was very strong. But when we looked at similar graphs that showed the trajectory of various subgroups, including kids with disabilities, we saw that same trajectory didn't exist. In fact, the performance had been going downhill. So that suggested that results-driven accountability, that accountability systems in states and at the federal level needed to be taking a closer look at what was going on with results and how do we impact improvement in the results scores of students with disabilities. So it sort of presented a changing context, that results-driven accountability represented a shift from compliance-based monitoring to an accountability system, and then based on differentiated monitoring and support. And I know that Todd will be talking about what that looks like in your state as well, differentiated monitoring and support. So the components of results-driven accountability are the state performance plan and the annual performance report, determinations that reflect state performance on results as well as compliance, and then differentiated monitoring and technical assistance to support improvement in all states, but especially in lower performing states. Now, these components of RDA at the federal level tend to be what states look to implement on the state level. So in other words, those districts that may have some of the greatest struggles in a differentiated monitoring system should be those districts that are going to receive the more intense supports to try to move the needle in those areas that they have lower scores and they're lower performing. The priorities of our RDA from OSEP to help close the achievement gap for kids with disabilities, to move away from a one-size-fits-all compliance-based monitoring approach, and to create a balanced system that looks at how well kids with disabilities are being educated, in addition to continuing efforts to protect their rights. So while we talk a lot in RDA about results and working to improve results in districts, by no means does that mean that compliance monitoring and all of those things are gone by the boards. Those are still very critical to the special education process, and states have to include in their general supervision systems, in their monitoring systems, the methodology that they're going to use to take a look at how compliance is in a given LEA when across the state. So at this point, we'd like to know if anyone has a question on any of these components of general supervision. If you do, you can *6 your phone to unmute it, and you can ask that question. And again, at any time, you can ask a question in the chat box. Does anybody have a question that they would like to ask about this information that I've shared with you thus far? Well, hearing none, I'm going to turn things back over to Todd. And again, if you do have a question, feel free to put things in the chat box, and we'll try to answer your questions as best we can at any point. So, Todd, I'm passing the baton to you.
Okay, and thank you, Bill. So now I'm going to kind of take everyone through some resources for some various components, for the components in of the 8 components, and then focus more specifically on our differentiated monitoring and support system, mainly because you also just received some documents from us. You should have received your data profile, your risk determination, your fiscal risk score, your determination, and your differentiated monitoring result. So at the state performance plan and state goals, you can access all of these on our data page. This is where we kind of give an introduction to all of our data, and then we go through all of each of the indicators. And you can also access that through this link on here. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that, but we will be talking about the APR SVP at a later webinar. Fiscal management is one of the biggest areas that people either have a lower understanding of or just don't spend as much time on. And we do see a lot of problems through fiscal management. But we have our finance page, which has our funding manual on it, and a lot of due dates on it as well. And speaking of, we're looking at not just IDA funds, but we're looking at, the OCAS system. We have joint federal programs, claims procedures, and we look at those independent audits as well when we conduct monitoring. These are some of the bigger areas of fiscal management that we think about from special ed: maintenance of effort, excess cost, time and effort reporting, vendor performance reviews, and co-ops and interlocal agreements arrangement. Here's some just basic fiscal timelines that we have, and closing date should really be June 30th on that for assurances in the LEA agreement. And then we have high needs applications, the final fiscal year submission, closeouts, and your budget application. Our policies and procedures, if you've been in special ed for a few years, then you know that we've revised our policies and handbook a couple times through a lot of stakeholder input on that. But you probably are already familiar about where to get our special ed policies and handbook and the process guide also. And Bill mentioned interagency agreements, memorandums of understanding. We do have those at the state level with, for example, Department of Rehabilitation Services, Department of Health, DHS, the Healthcare Authority, and the Department of Mental Health, Substance and Abuse Services. And that's actually kind of just a few of the bigger MOUs that we have. We do have a lot of interagency agreements with various universities and things like that in terms of helping support programs to get more teachers or things like that. So, and actually, if you ever have a question about exactly how we're spending our money in contracts, you can always call us. But also on that, in fiscal management, every year we submit our IDA Part B grant application that we put out for public comment in the spring. And then in May is when we send it in to the Office of Special Education Programs, the U.S. Department of Ed, for our IDA Part B actual grant. And you can always view that document and kind of see how we are using the federal funding. We have a lot of information on data for special education, and I think we have a pretty thorough data page, and this is how you get to it. It's a very long link, but also included in your packet was the Special Ed Director's Data Checklist and the Annual Timeline Summary, the data and reporting piece. And I encourage you guys to all use that Special Ed Director Data Checklist. It's very helpful just to make sure you're getting things in on time and when you need to be looking for certain things. Here's for the broader reports, there's a lot of other reports that we send to the Office of Special Education Programs, but this is what you're reporting to us. So the end of year, and then child count, and then the LEA assurances and agreements. And what we're giving back out to you is the district data profile, your determination, and significant disproportionality, which is actually new this year. Excuse me, and we will have a few webinars specifically about significant disproportionality coming up soon. And here's, so if you're curious, if you clicked on district reporting on FY 17, 16, or 15, we don't have this current year up quite yet, you can look through and see your data profile and your determination for all of those years. You can actually see all of the district determinations. It's a large Excel file. You can click on different districts to see how well other districts are doing. And we put that out there also so that you can see if another district is having similar issues as you, or maybe they're having successes where you're not having success, and to try to connect you that way. And so then you can also see the 16, 15, and 14 federal fiscal year SPR APR report, SPP APR, and our own state determination letters and our state systemic improvement plan. And I think for the past at least 4 years, OSEP also gives us a determination, which we've been lucky to meets requirements each year, which is really the result of districts doing a good job, because that's the same information we're sending in to the Office of Special Education Programs. In terms of the improvement, correction, incentives, and sanctions, those are some of the things we do, and this will kind of make more sense when I talk about the actual monitoring system, because as Bill was also saying, all of this is very interconnected, so it's hard to talk about one without talking about another. But some examples of these are corrective action plans, improvement plans, self-assessments, professional development that we do, the assurances. We always joke that we don't have a lot of good incentives except that we don't monitor you. And if anyone has some good ideas on incentives, I'd be happy to hear those. For dispute resolution, as hopefully most of you know, we work with the Special Education Resolution Center at Oklahoma State University, and they handle our facilitation, mediation, and due process. On the state complaint side, though, we handle those in-house, so we are the ones that investigate state complaints. And we don't have, for due process, we do not have as many as other states do. State complaints, we probably have about 20 to 25 state complaints a year. Some of those are dropped. We try to work with parents and districts on the front end more, help people come to agreements or understandings before they really need to engage in a formal dispute resolution process. I think we've been somewhat successful in resolving some issues before they get to a formal process. So if you have questions about mediation, facilitation, or due process, you can also go to that website. If you just search Oklahoma Special Education Resolution Center, you can find it. Some of the targeted technical assistance and professional development we do, it's also an outgrowth of the monitoring that we do. But for example, those self-assessments, the open door end of year and child count meetings that we have, and I encourage you to always come to those. We have about 100 districts that come to each of those in late May and then in September. And that's where we work one-on-one with districts, just looking at data, making sure it's accurate, answering any questions. But it's a really good opportunity for all of our directors out there, all of you guys, to meet our data team and make sure all your data is correct. And then also our hands-on budget workshops that a lot of you attend. Very beneficial. You can leave with your budget done. And so we go around the state each September doing that. Some of the other things coming up, we're about to start goals progress monitoring. And I think we've had a lot of people sign up for that. We're planning on posting some additional trainings for that. We've been, for the past couple of years, doing secondary transition trainings through the University of Oklahoma's Zero Center. We've been doing a lot of accommodations training. And then this year we started doing teacher tip sheets. I think we've only done a couple so far, maybe 3, that we send out through our listserv and through the larger agency listserv. And then also every other week we have our IEP webinar series about writing effective and compliant IEPs. And there's been some good attendance on that. And I encourage you, if you haven't participated in that, to start participating. And we also post those online as well. So our differentiated monitoring process, I'd say, prior to results-driven accountability, we focused mostly on compliance. And now we're looking more towards fiscal risk, but also student outcomes. And the fiscal risk piece is part of uniform grant guidance, which I won't really get into here, but it's basically to assess your risk to the state education agency. And the goal of differentiated monitoring is also to move towards the results-based accountability system, making sure we're focused on results and not just those compliance pieces. So we give you each a DMR, a differentiated monitoring result, and that's based on the risk score and determination rating. And that determination rating takes into account the compliance and the results piece of your data profile. And so what we then assign you is a level of support dependent on what the data looked like. So we'll talk a little bit about that here in a second. So the risk to SEA score for the fiscal piece, we look at maintenance of effort results, past and current. We look at the size of award changes in special ed directors, excess cost results, late claims, recent audit findings, special or unusual design, and complaint counts. So all of these things are, we collaborate a lot with other states. These are some of the same things that most states are looking at for their fiscal risk score. And it's also not something to really, on this piece, feel like your district's being dinged on these things, or as some people like to call it. But it's just that, the size of award, for example, if you're getting over $750,000 through IDB funds, that puts it on the state level to make sure that we're really taking a good look at that. And change in special ed director is also not one people should ever feel bad about. That's actually one that the federal government puts on us. So we had a higher fiscal risk score when I started, for example, because of a change in a special ed director. And then we look at, so we have the risk score, and then we look at your determination for the OSEP indicators for compliance and performance. I've kind of already explained this, but that's what the risk to SEA score looks at, just the degree of risk a district poses to the SEA in finance and other factors of concern. I'll tell you, most districts, I should have the numbers in front of me, but most districts are a Category 1, very low risk. We also have some mitigating factors. Which are, so if you attend a budget training, your budget's completed on time. And also if you participate in the First Year Directors Academy, your risk score goes down. And the reason we have those there is because we think, you may have had a change in special ed directors, but if you're attending the First Year Directors training, that's going to help you, and you will be less risk to the SEA. So the 17 indicators, and Bill mentioned we submit that in February. We submit indicator 17 technically a little later. There's several 100% compliance indicators, but we also have our own targets for most of the results indicators. And those are listed on your district data profile. I'm going to skip along here. I've kind of already talked about this stuff, sorry. Again, you can find all this information on the website, and what we just sent out will be available soon. We were giving everyone a little bit to look at their data profiles to make sure that, they agreed with it and we didn't miss anything. If we did miss anything, make sure to contact our data team. So your determination rating, we have 4 tiers. Meets requirements is 85 to 100 and so on. This is similar to how OSEP, Office of Special Education Programs, does their percentages. I think Tier 1 for them is actually 80 to 100%. So based on where your results are, and I'll add too, if you look at the Appendix B in the General Supervision System Manual, well, you can also look at your own district determination, but you'll see which elements we're actually looking at. So for results, we're really looking just at assessment, graduation, dropouts, and early childhood outcomes. And you can get bonus points for increased percentage or increased response rates on your parent surveys and for district improvement activities like a self-assessment or professional development activity that you submit to us. And again, that's because as long as you're kind of doing those things to improve, we don't want to find you in a lower tier. And we also just use those 3 indicators, assessment, graduation, dropout, and early childhood outcomes, because those are the results indicators that we feel like, and in talking to stakeholders, have at least a little more control over than other indicators, for example, least restriction environment. So the DMR table, this is how we differentiate our monitoring and how we expand our focus for districts that need more help according to the data that we have. So for districts that are at a level 1, they're very low for fiscal risk and they meet requirements under determination. You know, we're not really providing a lot. It's just front-loaded technical assistance, which we define as, you know, the professional development that we currently offer and manuals and guides, that kind of thing, webinars. And then for level 2 support, which we do have a lot of districts in, maybe 160 districts out of over 500. If the risk score was low or the determination was needs assistance, we do items A through D. So we require a self-assessment and some professional development modules. And we'll also have a webinar in December and later to talk about what those activities will involve for each district. But essentially, we require the self-assessment over an area that the district didn't do as well in. So if a district was low on assessment but graduation, we essentially pick the lowest one and require the self-assessment in that area. We don't require self-assessment in all areas, mainly because we want people to be able to focus on one thing at a time and not overwhelm districts with having to do an improvement plan, say, for, you know, every single indicator. We want there to be some real focus there and really looking at your data and seeing what you can do for that area. And professional development modules we leave up to districts, you know, just based on looking at your own data. How do you think you need to improve? And so you can pick which type of PD you offer. It could be online or in person. If a district's level 3, which means they were moderate risk or needs intervention for their determination, we also require attendance at our data retreat, which I think is late January this year. You've probably already been contacted about that. It doesn't sound too exciting, but districts that participated last year, I think, really enjoyed it and got a lot out of it. So if you are level 3 and you have that, it could be a really good thing for you. And we also require those districts to do an improvement plan, and we will be doing some targeted on-site monitoring. So we'll be doing on-site monitoring, but not looking at your whole program, just some specific things that we'll go over with you. Level 4 districts, which we don't actually have any level 4 districts, also do a comprehensive on-site monitoring, and we withhold funds, which we never really want to do. So please don't be in level 4. So it's a little difficult to explain the improvement activities and monitoring activities versus response to noncompliance. Even though you maybe meets requirements, you might have been less than 100% on a few of the compliance indicators. And so those are going to be areas that we will require action from. Excuse me, sorry. So for indicators 11, 12, 13, that's most of where our noncompliance is. We require a letter of assurance from the district. We make sure that student level noncompliance is corrected. That's what we call prong 1. There's an improvement plan, and then data verification, and for data verifications we use a sample. So we look at within a period of 3 months for a set percentage, is the district now in compliance with, say, Child Find, that they are doing individual evaluations on time. Sorry, I'm looking at the comments. The exact name of the training for districts in Tier 3. There's not an exact name. or Tier 3 is needs improvement, but I'm not sure exactly what you're asking. And then Catherine, for special ed directors, it's just 1 year. We're only looking at the first year someone is. For the second year, we don't give them a score on. And let me talk about the response to noncompliance just a little. We do that through our grants management system, which makes it a little easier on both of us. And so you'll log into the grants management system and then submit some data through there possibly. We can also look at the data ourselves, so sometimes we pull it on our end to make sure that student level data was corrected. But that's where you'll write your improvement plan. You won't write an improvement plan if you were within a certain percentage of the target. So if you're at 95%, we don't require an improvement plan. We just require that you look at your root causes. Tracy, if you believe there's an error in your district data profile, should you report it if it won't change the outcome? You can. We will. It's better for us to know if it should change, regardless of whether or not it changes the outcome. But we'll send you a new one if you believe there's an error in it. We'd rather the data was correct. So some of our timelines, this year we try to get them out, every year I try to get them out earlier and earlier, but it's all dependent on how quickly we get the data. We also have to get data from the Accountability and Assessment Office, so it's not just data from our child count and end of year. So our data profiles, the DMR and the risk assessment and the determination, we try to get out pretty early. And then non-compliance findings, if you had any of those need to be corrected by January 15th. And we do a prong 2 review to look systemically at, is the district now in compliance with the IDA for that indicator. We conduct that by May 1. And the reason that we want these corrected so early is that we can get everything cleaned up and everyone in compliance by the next end-of-year report data. So we want to make sure that everyone kind of starts fresh every year. And that's the reason that we've chosen to do it this way. This will be the second year that we do it this way. Another thing that we do when we issue, Bill was talking about issuing findings, we're required to issue findings basically anytime we see it. And so the main way that we do that is through looking at the data in a formal way. So another way that we do see noncompliance is through either complaints, which then we would require, we'd issue findings and require corrective actions. But also we have selective reviews, and that's when areas of concern are brought to our attention through, it could be through parents, another agency, another division within our agency, and we make a determination about, whether or not we need to provide some technical assistance or offer some professional development, or whether or not we may need to go out and do a comprehensive on-site monitoring if we feel like there are issues we need to address more in depth. So we do have selective reviews that's mostly where our on-site reviews come from. And for selective reviews, it's usually a comprehensive on-site review. And I went through that a little faster than I thought. If you have any questions, I'll tell you also, if you ever have any questions about special ed in general, I've told you this before, but everyone can call us anytime you need to. You should have, if you've ever gotten an email from me, then you have my cell phone number also, by the way. Feel free to call that. And I hope through this you kind of get a sense of all of the information that you're sending to us and why, and exactly, and when we're requesting actions from you guys, you know exactly why we're doing that. Does anyone have any questions? Oh, Tammy, I think you were talking about the data retreat for Tier 3. If you're Tier 3, Level 3 support, there's a data retreat that you're required to go to, which we pay for, by the way. And Patty is typing a question. If anyone has a question. Just wait a second. Patty, yes. Is there any time that someone from the State Department could sit down with you and help you develop a plan? You just need to call us and we can set up a time. Yeah. Sammy, some of the ways you can get bonus points. We give bonus points on the fiscal risk score. We call them mitigating factors because they actually lower your score. You want a lower score there. But those are getting your budget in on time, going to the hands-on budget training, and there was one more, which I am forgetting currently. Oh, attending the new special ed director's training with COSA and Andrea Kunkel. And then on the compliance, there are bonus points for timely submission on your child count and end-of-year data, and then bonus points for attending child count and end-of-year training. You have to attend both of those for the point. And then on the results for a determination, we give a bonus point for 50% or greater parent response rate on the parent survey or an annual response increase of 5%. And that one is because we have very low parent participation on those parent surveys, so our indicator 8 data for parental involvement doesn't really tell us a whole lot because we don't really have enough people filling it out, basically. So that bonus point is in there. It's 50% or greater or an annual increase of 5% because our districts are, some districts have a lot of students, some have very few, and we wanted to try to make that equitable. And then the other bonus point on there is district-driven improvement activities to enhance student outcomes or district processes, and that is any TD you're doing has to be at least a half day long, and somehow in a way that makes sense and you can justify, connected to special ed outcomes or your program. Tracy, you just need to, you can email me or Ginger or Tristan or Travis. Yes, you can use Pepper for that PD. For those of you that don't know, Pepper is the online module PD platform we have on EdPlan. There's a tab at the top called Pepper, and so you can go in there and use any of those. And we encourage you to, if you want to use that on a district level and get all your teachers in a room together and go through some of those modules, that would be great. Carla, the PD that you conduct throughout the year, we send a survey out in October at some point to ask you about that. I'm not sure exactly when we sent it out this year, but Ginger and our data office put that together. Just remember to document it for this year so you can have it for next year. And then make sure you have sign-in sheets and all of that to send to us. Yes, use a sign-in sheet. a tip sheet to be generated with ideas to increase parent survey participation. That would be good. We should think about how to increase that. Actually, TACE may be helping us with some parent involvement stuff that I failed to email them back about. Just waiting on a few people typing, and then maybe we can move to the interactive poll. And if you have any other questions, you can always call me.
Okay, Todd. Well, I'll go ahead and move to that poll, and we'll try to pick up on additional questions that are coming in, okay?
Sounds good.
Okay. Good questions. It's good for you folks to reach out and feel comfortable with speaking to folks at the State Department. So here's our poll. Now, if you would please go ahead and rate where you feel your understanding of this topic is now that you've participated in this webinar. It's fun to see that coming in real time, and that, you know, we see quite a few folks up there at that 4 and 5 level when there was very few, if any, back at the beginning who felt that comfortable with what general supervision and the LEA accountability process is in your state. So good. Thanks for those of you who completed that poll. Brenda, you can pull that down now, and we'll move on to our conclusion here in terms of summary and next steps. You know, it's always good to familiarize yourself with appropriate regulations in your state as well as the IDEA regs. And what Todd was sharing with you today was a little bit about what your state's monitoring system looks like and how it impacts your district through determinations and things like that. Be familiar with the resources that are available to your district from the state. And it sounds like there are quite a few there in terms of what the differentiated tier system looks like for through level 1 and so on. And by all means, be proactive. One of the things that I always encourage directors to do is make sure you get to know those folks who are directors who are nearby you. There will be times where you will really appreciate having somebody else to bounce those ideas off of. And it's really encouraging to see all the questions coming up in the chat box for Todd, because the other thing that I always tell folks is get to know the folks at your State Department. They are there to help you and to help you in any way that they can. So I really do encourage you to get to know folks there, get to know contacts there. Don't hesitate to call folks there with questions. That's what they want you to do. That's what they would really like you to do, to be able to help you out with things that are new and confusing to you. So be proactive that way, and look at your own data. Kind of look at, you know, where the challenges are in your own district's profile, and conduct some of your own root cause analysis conversations about what might be going on there and what we feel like we need to do. Good conversations to have with an administrative team in a district. And finally here, there's a link right here for a quick SurveyMonkey evaluation that we would appreciate if you take a moment and click on that. You can also find this link on the agenda that's in your e-packet. So whether you click on that right away here and go to it, or go back to your e-packet at the bottom of your agenda, you will see the same link there that will take you right to a SurveyMonkey that will take you about 3 minutes to complete. And we would sure appreciate that feedback there. So at TASE, we always talk about keeping the main thing, and that's children and youth with disabilities. So with that, I'm going to conclude, and we hope you will stay tuned for the December webinar on fiscal and budget procedures, and we'll have some other TASE staff working with some other Oklahoma Department staff on that webinar for you. But, you know, on behalf of TASE and everyone at Utah State, I want to take a moment to wish you all happy Thanksgiving. Todd, I'll leave it to you for any closing comments as well from your end.
Okay, yeah, I really appreciate everyone being on the webinar today, and glad that everyone could get signed up and everything in time. And I really encourage you to come to our other webinar trainings and a lot of other webinars that we're putting together past that. And again, just make sure if you have any questions, feel free to call us about anything or email us. Yeah, and also, and Bill's right, make sure you're looking at your data, which is why we have all the district data profiles on the data page, and you can see your past years, especially if you weren't there last year. It's helpful to know what you were and what your determinations have been. And then, again, we are trying to look more at results and the root cause of noncompliance. So if you did get a corrective action plan, you'll notice that it has a section on it for root cause analysis instead of focusing on, you know, what you were and weren't compliant for, but more like why you're not compliant and how to improve. So anyway, I appreciate everybody participating, and you'll also be getting an email from me if you're director with the larger binder download at some point in the next couple of days. So I appreciate it. Thank you.